What does it actually mean to be a self? I mean, really think about it. It's one of those fundamental questions, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Philosophers, scientists, really everyone have wrestled with it forever.
And in, the standard Western way of thinking,
Mm,
for a long, long time, the self was often put squarely inside the mind.
right. This idea of a non-physical thinking thing, a res cogitans, as Descartes called it,
Yeah.
separate from the body, separate from the world out there.
The thinking thing. The
Yeah.
bit that knows it exists because it's thinking, even if everything else is an illusion.
Exactly. And you still see the ripples of that today, even in really modern debate.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into sources that really push back against that whole picture of the self as this contained, objectifiable thing.
Our main guide here is Scott L. Marratto's book, The Intercorporeal Self, Merleau-Ponty on Subjectivity. It takes the work of the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty.
A major 20th century thinker.
Well, on one side, you've still got views that maybe they're not strict Cartesian dualists, but they still kind of locate subjectivity, that feeling of being you, mostly inside the head in the mental realm. And then on the other extreme, you've got these really strong reductionist views, often coming out of neuroscience.
Trying to explain it all away.
Pretty much. Trying to explain the self away entirely, reducing it down to just physical stuff, brain states, neurons firing, complex outputs of biological machinery. The self in that picture might even be called an illusion.
For just a side effect, yeah. An epiphenomenon, something that seems real but doesn't actually do anything.
Precisely. So what's interesting is that both these extremes, even though they look really different,
They both seem to treat the self as an object, right? Something you can study.
that's it. Something you can analyze either by looking inward, introspecting, or by measuring it from the outside with scientific tools. Something you can pin down and objectify.
So our mission today, really, is to unpack this core idea that subjectivity, that first-person feeling of being alive and experiencing the world, it's not just locked away inside us.
Right, it's not just in the head. Marratto argues, following Merleau-Ponty, that it's deeply, fundamentally, dynamically woven together with our physical bodies.
Our actual living body.
Our actions, our engagement with the world around us, and crucially, how we interact with other people. It's intercorporeal.
Intercorporeal between bodies.
We'll explore how our experience of ourselves and even of reality itself doesn't come from some detached mind looking out, but emerges from this constant, lived, embodied interaction.
We're going to hit some pretty complex concepts, things like situated cognition.
The difference between spatiality of position, like objective map coordinates, and spatiality of situation are lived bodily space.
The thing called the paradox of expression, which sounds intriguing.
Oh, it is. And the role of otherness, how encountering other people isn't just incidental, but actually helps shape our own self-consciousness.
Now, we should say this is academic material. It engages with some intricate philosophical argument scientific research.
So, yeah, we'll be aiming for rigorous analysis, getting into the details. Clarity, definitely, but also the depth needed to really grasp what's at stake here.
Okay, let's set that stage then. The traditional view, the res cogitans, the self as this thinking substance, separate from the physical.
It's been incredibly influential, that picture. The I is primarily consciousness, thinking, awareness, and that stuff is somehow non-physical, distinct from the messy, extended world of bodies and objects.
The way to study it was mainly introspection, right? Looking inward.
Looking inward, yeah. Trying to peel back the layers of sensation and worldliness to find that pure mental core. The body, in that view, is often just a vehicle, maybe even a hindrance.
The ghost in the machine.
Ghost in the machine. Then, like you said, science comes along, materialism rises, and you get the opposite picture. No ghost, just machine.
Consciousness, subjectivity, it's all just brain activity. Complex, yes, but ultimately physical.
Right. Philosophical problems become scientific ones. How does the brain do consciousness? But the first-person perspective itself often gets explained away, maybe as that illusion, or just an emergent property with no real independent force.
But both views, the Cartesian and the reductionist, they both want to make the self an object of study. One studies it from the inside, the other from the outside.
That's the shared ground, the idea that you can somehow stand apart from the self and understand it completely.
And this is where the challenge comes in. From perspectives like situated cognition, or what something's called the E approach, embedded, embodied, ecological. This view starts by saying, hold on, that feeling of being someone that lived through first-person character of experience, that's real. It's not an illusion.
Okay, so it pushes back hard against the reductionists straight away. It says subjectivity is a genuine phenomenon we need to take seriously.
Yes, but then it also critiques the Cartesian focus on introspection, on finding the self by looking inward at purely mental states.
So it's not about detached reflection either.
No, it argues the self isn't primarily found by looking inward like that.
So where is it found then, according to this situated view, if not inside, looking in?
This is the big shift. It suggests subjectivity reveals itself first and foremost in the way the world shows up for you as you're engaged with it, as an active, outwardly focused living being.
So it's in the interaction, the manners of givenness, how the world appears to me as I'm moving, acting, dealing with things.
Your sense of self is somehow woven into the very fabric of that dynamic engagement with the world.
That feels, yeah, very different. And the source notes this can be, well, unsettling.
Why unsettling?
Yeah.
Because it blurs the lines.
I think so. Our usual intuition is that I stop at my skin. Galen Strawson, for instance, raises the worry that focusing so much on the embodiment and the environment might make us lose sight of the feeling of being a specifically mental something.
The inner life, the stream of consciousness.
Right. Is that being downplayed? But then you have others, more radical proponents like Varela, Thompson, and Roche, who are influenced by Buddhist thought.
And what do they say?
They might question whether we even need to posit that specifically mental something as a core fixed entity. They sometimes suggest the Western obsession with a truly existing self might even be a kind of pathology stemming from dualism.
Wow, that's taking it much further. Not just saying the self is embodied, but questioning the very existence of that core self.
For some, yeah. Others, like Andy Clark, who's a major figure in situated cognition, acknowledge it feels unsettling as the bounds of the self threaten to push out into the world. But the shared idea is that these boundaries are way more fluid and dynamic than we usually assume.
And Marratto helps us here by drawing a distinction, right, between two ways of understanding situatedness.
Yes, this is really helpful. He talks about it in an epistemological sense first. This is basically situated cognition as a theory about how we know things, how cognition works.
Okay, so knowledge isn't about building internal maps.
Not primarily. It's grounded in behavior, in dynamic sensorimotor loops. You understand the world by interacting with it directly. Your body's systems are tuned to the environment. The environment matters as perceived, as it relates to your potential for action.
So situatedness here is a better way to describe how our brains and bodies actually process information and interact compared to older disembodied computer models.
It's a critique of purely representational theories. But Marratto says there's a deeper sense, the ontological sense.
Ontological about reality, about being itself.
Yes, this isn't just about how we know the world, it's a claim about what the world is. Studying cognition, in this view, isn't just about how minds link up with an external reality, it's investigating how a world comes to be for a subject. It reveals the deep dynamics, the co-belonging, and the difference between a subject and its objects.
Whoa. So it's not just how I perceive the cup, but how my being a perceiver is tangled up with the very nature of reality, how the world and I sort of co-arise in that interaction.
That's the flavor of it, yeah. It's a claim about the fundamental structure of existence as it's experienced by a living, embodied being. Marratto argues the epistemological view needs this deeper ontological grounding to make full sense.
And that ontological depth sounds like pure Merleau-Ponty territory, moving beyond just scientific models to a philosophy of existence itself. Let's dig into that embodied view more, especially perception in space.
Okay, so Merleau-Ponty, along with sensorimotor accounts and ecological psychology, they all share a critique of the traditional way of thinking about perception, especially something like seeing depth.
The old view being, the brain gets flat 2D images from the eyes and has to figure out the 3D world from cues, like perspective, shading, things like that.
Exactly. It's like the brain is solving a geometrical puzzle. The scientist knows the 3D world is out there and asks, how does the brain reconstruct it?
Like a little computer inside running algorithms.
Right. And the critique is, well, first, the perceiving body doesn't start with that objective knowledge the scientist has. And second, models based on that idea, like in early robotics, often end up being very brittle, inflexible. Their worlds feel impoverished, underdetermined.
So if perception isn't primarily inferring a 3D model from 2D data, what's the alternative?
The core idea is that perception, including depth, isn't inferred later. It's an original feature of our experience, because perception is fundamentally rooted in behavior, in action.
We're moving beings first, not static data receivers.
Reaching, grasping, walking around. Our sense of depth isn't just a visual calculation. It's tied to our potential actions, the effort involved, the possibilities for movement.
So far away means takes longer to get there. It can't reach it right now. It's practical.
It is. The world shows up for us already structured by our aims, our projects, its practical significance. It conforms to these reliable patterns, these sensorimotor invariants that emerge as we interact. Like how things flow past us visually when we walk, that flow is an invariant structure tied to our movement.
It feels much more alive, this view. The world's structured for me because of my active body.
It does. And this idea, perception starting in behavior, leads to saying that form has priority over content. There's no such thing as raw sense data hitting us first. Sensations are abstractions we make later from an already meaningful, structured field.
Form over content. But Merleau-Ponty complicates this, doesn't he? He doesn't just throw out sensation completely.
No, and this is absolutely crucial for his phenomenology. He insists that even though perception is active and structured, there's still a stratum of sensation, a kind of passive dependence.
A stratum of sensation, like a layer.
Yeah, a layer or maybe a residue. Sensation on its own isn't a clear piece of information. It's more like a vague beckoning, an instability, a bit of, well, nonsense almost, within the meaningful structure.
A vague beckoning, like a feeling that something is there, calling for attention, but it's not yet clear what.
It's the feeling of responding to an obscurely expressed question from the world. This is what keeps us open to surprise, to genuine novelty. It acknowledges that reality isn't just created by our actions or sensorimotor skills. There's a givenness, a facticity.
Something that resists being totally absorbed by my intentions. The world pushes back a bit.
Yes. This element of passivity, of being open to being affected, is key. It prevents perception from just being a projection of our powers. Our sensorimotor skills give form, but sensation ensures that form is always potentially unstable, open to transformation from within the field itself.
And movement plays a deeper role here too, right? It's not just executing tasks. Sensation is described as making space.
It is. Movement is always aimed, oriented towards that vague beckoning. And sensation itself is already spatial because that initial contact, that primordial contact with being, is always sort of in the past of the experience.
In the past.
It's not a sharp present ping. It's more like a solicitation for future clarity, a call for a movement that will articulate it, bring it into focus, make it definite in space. The movement makes it appear clearly.
So the sensation is the question, and my movement is the attempt to answer it, to give it definite form and location.
That's a great way to put it. Movement lets things appear, but never instantaneously or completely. That primordial contact only shows itself through the movement it motivates. And the movement itself involves these tacit decisions, these contingent ways we carve out possibilities. This is how he avoids both pure empiricism, just passive sensations, and intellectualism, mind imposing all structure.
Navigating between those old philosophical battle lines.
Yes. And this movement involves a kind of retroactive determination. The meaning of each phase of the movement often only becomes clear in light of the whole unfolding action. What seems like a distinct sensation and reflection is really a simplification of this deeper original past, a past that was never fully present as such, but grounds the present.
So sensing isn't just receiving data. It's a call to move, and the movement itself shapes the meaning of that initial call.
Right, and this original past, this non-presence within the present, has to be preserved in the movement. Movement absorbs its beginnings, but must also retain that resistance, that otherness, to let something genuinely new appear as its motivation. It needs to stay open to its own transformation.
That tension again absorbing, yet retaining difference. Which brings us back to spatiality of position versus spatiality of situation and this idea of spectral depth.
Let's unpack that distinction more. Spatiality of position, that's objective space. Geometry, coordinates, locations independent of any observer. Abstract distance.
The map view.
The map view, exactly. Spatiality of situation is lived space, organized around me, the living, moving being, here versus there, near enough to touch, too far to reach, navigable, graspable. It's space defined by my body's capabilities and projects.
My world, as it matters to me right now. And you mentioned scientific work that supports this.
Yes, Cutting and Vishton's research on depth cues. They found that the brain weights different cues differently depending on your situation, like binocular vision matters up close, atmospheric haze matters far away. Their model needs something like situation sensitivity to work properly. It kind of implicitly validates Merleau-Ponty.
Science catching up with philosophy, in a way.
And then there's J.J. Gibson's ecological psychology, his idea of affordance perception.
Right. We perceive what things afford us possibilities for action.
Exactly. A chair affords sitting, a handle affords grasping. We perceive these directly, not by inferring properties. For Gibson, ecological space is made of places defined by what they offer the organism relative to its body, very close to Merleau-Ponty's situation-position distinction.
So perception is seeing the fit between my body, this I can, and the environment's offerings.
Yes. Merleau-Ponty says the whole spatial field, the foreground-background structure, is unified by the body proper, le corps propre, as this I can. My bodily powers are the original yardstick for near and far. Experience extends beyond immediate reach, but it's an expansion of this bodily field of presence.
Okay, so that defines a kind of depth based on action potential, what Marratto calls affordance depth.
Right. But Marratto argues Merleau-Ponty points to something even more radical, a depth that includes the limits of our powers. And these limits aren't just failures, they're how the world's inexhaustible depth actually reveals itself. This connects back to that original past.
How do the limits of my power reveal depth related to a past that was never present?
This radical depth involves antagonism, a tension holding things together while keeping them different. Presence-absence, unity-plurality, sameness-otherness, all held in this dynamic balance. The fact that I can't fully grasp or determine everything reveals a depth that resists my I can.
Antagonism, like clash.
Yes. Think of Merleau-Ponty's concert hall example. Listening with eyes closed, the music creates its own vast, dark space. Open your eyes and the visible hall seems confining. But the music space doesn't just vanish. It steals through the visible, besieging and displacing it.
The space of hearing and the space of sight conflict. But they coexist in my experience.
He says each sense presents its world as an unknowable absolute for the others. They're incompossible. They can't fit neatly into one objective frame. They clash, but they unite in the clash against the backdrop of a shared world. The tension itself is preserved.
So unity isn't the starting point. It's an ongoing achievement, managing these clashes, and this links to the original past.
Yes. This incompossibility, this clash in unity, is the manifestation of the original past as spectral depth. It means consciousness doesn't start with unified space. Unity is enacted. The spectral depth is the trace of this incompossibility, the tension that prevents static unity. It's an unpresentability within presence.
A haunting within the present. Does this connect to action being rooted in passivity?
It does. Marratto emphasizes that for Merleau-Ponty, action isn't primary. It's rooted in a prior givenness, a passivity, a fundamental spatiality that's there before any specific act. My ability to do draws on this mysterious givenness of bodily power, which rests on an originary passivity.
Originary passivity, like my capacity to act is given to me as my body, but I didn't create that capacity myself.
That's the idea. The fact that my body can act, is oriented, is given in this way. And this passivity is the condition for being self-conscious as embodied. My sense of here, the origin point of my perspective, is fundamentally a sense of the givenness of my own body. It's mine not because I possess it intellectually, but because it's given as my unique perspective point.
And this passivity must open onto others, right? Intersubjectivity.
Absolutely. My perspective isn't sealed off. It slips spontaneously into the others. My here is inherently open. We're united before reflection in this one single world shared by anonymous subjects of perception. The body's unifying structure is open enough to incorporate other viewpoints.
Anonymous subjects. Like a shared ground of bodily experience before we're fully distinct eyes.
Kind of. The potential to see from another's viewpoint is built into my own embodied spatiality, which is grounded in that givenness, that passivity. Lawler's idea of interpreting the unreflective via the originary past as a trace fits here. That spectral depth, that non-presence, is the spatiality of that past.
Our present experience haunted by a past that was never fully present. And that trace makes presence and shared presence possible.
Yes, a non-presence that's not just absence, but an active resistance within the field. The clash of senses is part of this. While reflection might smooth it over, the underlying tension remains. The unity is always enacted against this difference.
A dynamic, unstable unity. And consciousness itself, this repetition without original, emerges from a kind of break.
That's a key point. The explicit I isn't the subject of some primordial unified contact. It results from an original breaking with being, a distancing that opens up these depths. The discontinuity between our present enacted space and that primordial bodily space marks this original disunity, our finitude, birth, death.
So the I emerges from this break, enacted through these local tacit decisions on the periphery of my being.
Yes, not from a central command post. It emerges from contingent responses at the edge of engagement.
Let's shift to how this plays out in learning and development, especially in babies. This isn't just theory.
Right. Take infant color perception. Traditionally, maybe seen as a deficit, they just can't distinguish colors well yet.
But Merleau-Ponty saw it differently.
He argued psychologists were imposing adult categories. He saw it as a different structure of consciousness based on physiognomic distinctions.
Physiognomic, like perceiving the overall expressive quality.
Maybe distinguishing warm versus cold fields, or colored versus uncolored, before specific hues like red or blue. Learning to see specific colors isn't just filling in boxes. It's establishing a new dimension of experience, unfolding in a priori. The world actually restructures itself for the infant.
Wow. Learning shapes the very dimensions of experience.
And this connects to senses being distinguished by their manners of making space. Sensation, as a motor response, appears as that repetition without original. The unique quality of a sensation gets sublimated as meaning.
Sublimated, transformed into meaning through the body's response.
Yes, and senses communicate via a shared significant core. Movement reveals a style, a rhythm. Organs become subjectivity by stylizing worlds through their specific ways of moving and responding.
Style is embodied understanding. My way of moving gives a style to my world.
And acquiring habits, learning an instrument. Riding a bike isn't just adding skills. It's appropriating fresh instruments, new ways for the body to engage. The body appropriates itself through movement. Sensation calls for rhythm. Learning involves different manners of making space, answering each other, completing each other.
Learning fine-tunes the body's rhythmic engagement, making it more itself.
And developmental research backs this up strongly. Kermoyan and Campos's work on infant locomotion.
Crawling and walking.
Yeah, infants with more locomotor experience do better on spatial tasks, even ones where they're sitting still, like finding hidden objects.
Why? How does moving help them find things when seated?
Because active movement fundamentally articulates their bodily spatiality. It shapes how they understand object locations relative to themselves and landmarks. It drives the shift from purely egocentric space relative to me to allocentric space relative to the environment.
So learning to move changes how the infant's body is open to itself by being open to the world's stable structure. It's not just a preset program unfolding.
Which connects to Jacobson's idea of learning to dwell. Feeling at home in the world comes from this habituated subjectivity. This home provides stability, but also the base for exploring the unknown. It requires that tension, open yet closed, vulnerable yet secure. The world has sensory levels, not just geometry.
Home is a dynamic base camp built from bodily habits.
Now, these sensorimotor and ecological views are powerful, but Marratto also points out their limitations in fully capturing Merleau-Ponty's view of subjectivity.
Okay, where do they fall short, despite their strengths?
The concern is they might still carry hidden assumptions that flatten the pre-reflective dimension. Take the sensorimotor view of Mayen and O'Regan. They talk about forcible presence when a sensation grabs you, and subjectivity as experiences offering chances to act or think.
Trying to account for the givenness and for meaning.
Yes. They ask, what makes some sensations matter more? Often the answer involves attention and action guidance. For them, consciousness can basically be equated with attention. You're only aware if you're actively using the information.
So no active use, no consciousness of it. Seems a bit strong.
It does. Thompson critiques this, saying it misses the temporal dynamics, the implicit-explicit continuum. And crucially, it explains attentional shifts via subpersonal dispositions, mechanisms below awareness. This misses the first personal character. Why does something grab my attention now? It's tied to my meaning, my situation, my values, not just an automatic switch.
Right. My background, my projects make things salient. Equating consciousness with just active attention misses that whole layer.
Then there's a critique of ecological ontology, like Turvey's attempt to describe affordances in universal objective terms, maybe by quantifying dispositions.
Finding the universal laws of affordance.
Kind of, but Marratto argues this risks turning real possibility into predictable actuality. For Merleau-Ponty, possibility is more like Advent promise, the genuinely new, the unanticipated. Subjectivity involves openness to what cannot be fully predicted by laws. Quantifying it risks losing that essential openness.
The scientific drive for universal laws might miss the lived quality of possibility.
And then there's the issue with ecological self-awareness. The idea is we co-perceive self and world simultaneously, like optical flow telling us about both us and the environment. It rejects special proprioceptors for self-sensing.
So my sense of moving comes from seeing the world move relative to me.
That's the gist. But critics like Zahavi and Gallagher ask, doesn't this presuppose the very self-awareness it's trying to explain? How do you know which part of the sensory flow is me and which is world without some prior non-perceptual sense of your body?
Yeah, it feels a bit circular. You need a self to interpret the data as self-related.
Critics argue these views end up treating the body as just another object in the perceived world, and self-awareness as object awareness. They miss that the body is both subject and object. It's the experiencer and can be experienced.
It sees and is seen.
By not accounting for the pre-reflective bodily awareness that structures perception before the body is an object, they risk smuggling back mind-body problems. That pre-reflective sense of the body from the inside is fundamental.
And this is where the body schema, body image distinction is so key.
Absolutely vital. Body image is your perceptions, beliefs, attitudes about your body, seeing your hand, thinking about your posture. It's perception of the body.
And body schema.
Body schema is the system of sensorimotor capacities functioning without conscious monitoring. It's the capacity to do. Walking, typing, reaching the skills that work best when you're not focused on your body itself.
The non-conscious know-how, the felt sense of my body's position and capabilities that lets me act smoothly.
It's dynamic, constantly updating based on the body's projects. It's the ground of the lived body's unity. It appears to itself by not appearing as an object, by letting the world appear, a non-observational acquaintance with itself.
So body schema is the body as subject, enabling action without being the object of attention.
Yes. Gallagher sees it mostly as non-conscious performance. Zahavi agrees it's crucial, but argues Gallagher makes it too non-conscious, excluding pre-reflective awareness. For Zahavi, that minimal, non-thematic first-personal givenness, the feeling that this sensation is mine is conscious, even if pre-reflective.
So a subtle but important debate. Is that basic, embodied awareness non-conscious performance or a minimal form of consciousness?
These debates highlight the core challenge, accounting for the body as both subject and object without falling into old traps.
Maintaining that tension seems key. Let's move to how this embodied intercorporeal self develops explicit self-consciousness, the I, expression, language, others.
Yes. It builds on that idea of style as embodied understanding. My style, my manner of being, is individual but also recognizable. Understanding someone else's style isn't abstract. It's taking over that manner, feeling it in my own body's potential response.
An embodied recognition.
Exactly. And this involves that communion of senses. But this embodied knowledge has limits. Absolute knowledge, grasping every motive, is impossible.
Why impossible?
Because it would mean fully grasping or occluding that original past, that dimension of non-presence. The original past motivates us, but resists being fully captured. Our experience of reality includes the impossibility of total objective truth. Consciousness, as repetition without original, leaves us without a perfectly transparent ground.
So the very foundation of knowing has something elusive built in.
Yes. Which leads Merleau-Ponty to that really provocative question. Is the origin of knowledge based on a decision as unwarrantable as the one which shuts up the madman? Suggesting our grasp on reality might rest on a kind of fundamental, perhaps unjustifiable commitment.
Wow. Knowledge built not on solid rock, but maybe a leap of faith.
And this connects to the paradox of expression. Experience often feels silent, mute, needing expression to print out its meaning.
Okay, something latent wanting to be articulated.
But the paradox, if it were totally mute, how could expression bring out its own meaning? Any meaning would be imposed from outside. For expression to be authentic, experience must already have something yet to be said within it, something akin to expression.
It needs expression, but can only be expressed if it's already expressive. A loop.
Expression is neither pure creation from silence nor pure repetition of something fully formed. Finding meaning requires responding to the demands of language, to existing structures, even as we transform them.
So language isn't just a tool applied to mute experience. It's somehow woven into experience's potential for meaning from the start.
Precisely. Merleau-Ponty argues all perception, action, body use is primordial expression. It constitutes signs, implants meaning, founds tradition. It's how the world gets articulated culturally and historically.
My body's way of being is an original act of expression creating meaning.
And this is where intercorporeal communication is key for the I. Understanding others' gestures isn't just intellectual inference, it's a reciprocity. The other's intention inhabiting my body, mine his, meaning passes body to body.
A shared embodied space of understanding.
Yes. And George Herbert Mead had a resonant idea. Language is gestural, emerging from a social matrix. A gesture becomes a sign not by initial intent, but because it works in a social act, it calls for a response, enabling mutual adjustment.
The meaning arises from the interaction itself.
These intercorporeal movements, maybe starting as unconscious conversation, get broken up and retrospectively understood as signifier signified. Explicit self-consciousness, the I, arises for Mead from a retrospective reading of my own gestures as having significance within that social context. I see myself as an intender by seeing how my bodily acts function socially.
So my I emerges not from looking inward, but from seeing myself reflected in the social response to my embodied actions. A huge challenge to Descartes.
It is. The social act articulates itself, a ferment of transformation. Movements become conventional signs. Kendon's point about gestures moving from iconic to arbitrary fits this, shaped by the needs of the system.
Language gets its power from this deep, embodied social process.
And Merleau-Ponty links this power to the human condition. Expressing my unique singularity requires entering this shared system, destroying pure privacy to admit others.
This loops back to that vague beckoning, the unknown approaching. Even a simple sensation has an authority of presence, foreign, yet most intimate.
Yes, an encounter, an event of origin, but with something other, something foreign, which is paradoxically what's most proper to us as open beings.
That foreignness being intimate, a perfect lead-in to the final theme. Time, alterity, and the emergence of consciousness. It's not just language, but time and otherness shaping the I.
The idea of pure auto-affection, self-feeling isn't enough. Our relation to past and future involves dependence on events we can't fully anticipate. Maybe auto-affection is an effect of something deeper that dispossesses the self, opens it up. Time as hetero-affection, openness to the arrival of otherness.
My sense of time isn't just internal continuity, it's linked to the impact of the unexpected, the other.
The flow of time itself is tied to the body's entanglement with otherness, especially other persons who speak and listen, making my own body legible. What enables explicit self-consciousness, the I, is that the non-presence within my body's presence, that spectral depth, is also the advent of another person.
My I emerges because I need language and others. The other person is necessary for me to become self-aware.
Yes. The other anticipates my future, even my death, in ways I can't. They see things in me I don't. Relating to the other is relating to my own finitude, my birth and death, and the chance of somehow persisting beyond myself through this shared realm.
Wow, my sense of my own beginning and end is tied to the other's perspective, not purely private.
And because this hetero-affection is fundamental, the origin of my present time can't just be consciousness of time. It must include what can't be grounded in that consciousness, the radical past, the open future. This temporal difference appears as a constitutive emptiness, a gap. My present is porous, haunted by a past never fully present, awaiting a future that arrives as otherness.
My present isn't self-contained. It holds the trace of non-present past and the promise of another future.
Yes. And the I is described not as the originator, but as a decision we might take responsibility for, but whose grounds aren't fully ours. We didn't just decide to start time for ourselves.
The I is enacted by those local decisions on the periphery of my being, resulting from that original break with being, opening up difference.
Exactly. The discontinuity between present enacted space and primordial bodily space marks this original disunity, tied to birth and death. The I emerges from a break, an opening to difference, otherness, embodied complexity in a shared world.
What a journey. From the contained self to this dynamic, embodied, intercorporeal process, rooted in passivity, shaped by language, time, otherness, and the impossibility of total grasp.
It really is. Marratto's engagement with Merleau-Ponty offers such a rich way to rethink these core questions. It shows how vital philosophy is, even for understanding things like perception or cognition that seem purely scientific.
It pushes us beyond seeing ourselves as just minds looking out, towards embracing this emergence from the dance between our bodies, the world's call, and the fundamental presence of others.
And it invites you, the listener, to reflect. Think about navigating a room, understanding an expression. How do these everyday acts embody these ideas? Does seeing your body as the ground of your being, not just a tool, change things for you?
So here's a thought to leave you with. If our very sense of time, our past and future, even our birth and death, are fundamentally tied to the advent of another person, what does this profound dependence on otherness really tell us about the classic idea of the isolated, self-sufficient self? Maybe that whole search for a self that could exist alone is chasing a ghost, if the self at its core is always already relational.